Welcome, Dr. Krefft. We, on behalf of the Onset Spiritualist Church, we are so grateful for your continued knowledge helping us during this pandemic. We're grateful that you were able to, work with us so that we can better meet the needs of our community. And one of the things that we realize during this time is that so many people are in need of some knowledge. And not everyone knows about your background, so we're curious if you could give us a little bit about your background.
I'd be happy to. I'm a clinical psychologist. I work with people in psychotherapy, and this summer is going to be 4 decades that I have worked with people in clinical psychology. People over the years have taught me much of the information that I present in these videos. When I was in graduate school, there was just really a minimal amount of information that was presented to us directly on the emotions. Since then, a lot of information has come forward in the field that we now call emotional intelligence. Before that, I was a school teacher. I've taught on all levels. I started out teaching primary school, then junior high school, then high school, and when I went back to school in psychology, don't you know, they put me to teaching the undergraduates introductory psychology.
Isn't that interesting? We've got a wonderful background, and in the community we have linked together, and knowing that you have this wisdom and knowledge and working with folks. I myself work for a nonprofit agency that helps victims, and victims always experience post-traumatic stress,
yes,
anxiety,
yep,
trauma, all of that. So myself working in the schools, and after talking to you and listening to you and your knowledge, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This could be so helpful within the schools, because most of the kids that are in my support groups and things like this have anxiety,
yes,
trauma in their life.
Sure.
They suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. So my excitement in talking with you was like, how would you suggest, or what could you do, or what would you want to do, or what would you suggest to our communities of schools to best help their students?
Yes, that is my most specific area of interest and expertise. Emotional intelligence in the schools. Teaching young people the same principles, the same strategies that we're covering in these videotapes. You know, it's interesting that to this day, we talk about mental health issues. We're thinking of it in terms of our traditional way of thinking, which is mental health. Health teachers in particular in the schools, and sometimes school counselors, school psychologists, that's their field, the mental health of their students. However, it's what everyone shares in common is our human emotions. And it's emotions, emotional health, that is my most specific area of expertise. How to raise emotionally healthy, emotionally open human beings. These videos are necessary at this time because the vast majority of adults today who are going through this pandemic have had little or absolutely no instruction anywhere along the line about how to constructively recognize, handle, and address their emotions.
And this is the one area that has just been so enlightening to us. The knowledge that you give, it's what we don't know that hurts us. And so, you know, instead of people, there's a word, anxiety or trauma and stress, we know it's a zing to us, but to really know your information, to really know that it's a thought. It just so syncs with what we believe in this church even. You know, thoughts are things.
That is absolutely a revelation to a lot of people. In the 20th century, we took a very long time getting to a place where we collectively, humanity, were willing to think about our thinking. We just took our thinking for granted And as far as emotions were concerned, well, we might acknowledge butterflies in the stomach or something similar to that, but did not, the vast majority of people, until the end of the century, the late 80s and 90s, the vast majority of people didn't even realize that it's what we think in our heads about ourselves and our world that create our emotions.
Yes, so this was, I just so hope everyone, listens to these, videos, because they're so informative, and it makes it more simple. And because when you hear about these words, it causes stress even, hearing anxiety or trauma or post-traumatic.
Very true.
And so it's just been such a gift to us with this knowledge. And one of many of the interesting things was about, when I was in college, I had some social studies and things like this, but you brought up a very good key that would be helpful to people right now about that we all need a community,
yes.
But yet we break off from that community. And I thought that was so informal, and that was information for people who are suffering out there because maybe they don't get along with their family members, or why aren't they as liked in their family unit as their other members, and it's what we don't know that can hurt us.
Right. I want to go back to one of the first things you said. You used the word simple. The amazing thing about these principles is that if you look at each strategy I present one by one, it is genuinely simple, direct, straightforward. That doesn't mean it's easy.
There you go.
It's not easy because we did not learn these principles as children. We didn't grow up with them. The whole issue, for example, of breathing, that could be taught to preschool children and then continued to be taught all through the years. By the time that young person was an adolescent, they would be doing it automatically. Think of how that would help teenagers as they go through all the angst that is normal for the teenage years. So yes, let's see, what was the second part of your question?
Well, it made me think about something. Also is that there's a couple of things going on in our world right now in the school system. They've taken economics, things like this away, and your health teachers may only see their children that they've got to do health with far more less than they ever have in the average school system. So their time with the students are very less. Children don't get all the dynamics that they really need in a consistent way. And I really thought when they started having the specialized schools that they would be able to implement more of these things.
Yes.
So for those out there that are looking for something to do, maybe we should start schools that will teach these.
Yes, exactly. I've noticed over the years, from the time I was a teacher till now, it is an ever-present issue with school administrators to carve up the day and carve up the week in order to teach as much as society wants them to teach. This is why, in presenting these type of strategies, I have suggestions for teachers, for health teachers, for school counselors, about how to build these understandings into the curriculum so that no additional class might be needed except for the health teacher to, as the health teacher teaches mental health, because that's part of the mental health curriculum, the health curriculum these days, it's mental health, to also make a point of teaching about emotional health.
Very much so. Because, I see it when I go into the schools, that I can see it in the children's eyes when I talk about victims and certain situations that could happen to people. And I can tell right off the bat that some kids in there, that not everyone's in the same household. Some people are living with trauma and they experience trauma within their own unit.
Sure.
So if this was implemented in curriculum, it would touch base and save many souls, I believe.
Yes.
And so you know, when I heard that you wrote a book, I got so excited. And I don't know if you want to touch base with that.
Sure. The book that I have just recently published and up to this is Emotional Intelligence in Schools, a comprehensive approach to developing emotional literacy. This is a book for high schools, but a savvy elementary school teacher could take it and translate the principles into the language of middle school, junior high, and present the principles there too. This is a more comprehensive book. Our videos that we're doing are on one emotion. They're centering on one emotion, and that is fear, what people call anxiety. My teaching, though, is about the whole gamut of challenging emotions, what people to this day call negative emotions. I don't call them negative because they're simply part of our humanity. When we call our emotions fear, anger, grief, guilt, when we call them negative, we don't realize we're calling ourselves negative because they're part of our makeup as human beings. So I strive to take the most positive approach that I can about these emotions and teaching people about what they are and how to deal with them in a healthy way.
That in itself, what you just said, helps me.
Yes, exactly. We as human beings, we're physical, emotional, mental, spiritual creatures. And what we did in the 20th century is we accepted the physical material level. Modern people, we're all about the physical material level. We accepted the mental level. The mental level is represented in culture as schools, education. You think, we want our kids to think, we want them to learn information. All that we do with our mind. And we accept the spiritual level. Americans as a whole express their spirituality in different ways, but we're a spiritual people. But when it comes to the emotional level of our humanness, we were taught to reject that level. And then we wonder why we have, quote, mental health issues.
Right. And so let's elaborate on that. The emotional, often people were taught back in the 17th, 18th century, men were taught to suck it up when you go to war, don't show your emotions.
Sure.
And women weren't allowed to express their anger and their strength, okay? We believe those roles. Women were supposed to be submissive and to the caretakers and so forth,
Sure.
and the men were supposed to be strong and the action takers. So many families were brought up like to suppress those emotions.
Yes, we were given very direct messages. Many people, so we're taking a look at self-talk. Self-talk is what you learn. We need to learn new self-talk to help ourselves. But self-talk already exists in the head. So many people have a piece of self-talk in their head along the lines of don't feel, or don't be emotional, or don't cry, or I'll give you something to cry about. This is actual self-talk inside the heads of many people because this is what they were taught. And that's why, to combat that, we want to begin to start practicing new self-talk, beginning with perhaps the words, I give myself permission to feel, or I accept the emotional part of me.
That's so knowledgeable and so helpful. What you're giving us is just so important, and again, I hope people are listening and share this. The other part of it that made me think about the students and people that I've worked with, is that oftentimes they are ostracized from their own family. They don't have friends, or they don't feel they have friends. And during this pandemic, the people that, I think about people with addictions. Isolation is part of the disease.
Sure.
So here they are isolating, and we know that we know right now that the liquor stores are going up in sales 50% more, and a lot of people are now drinking more or whatever it may be. But the idea of isolation, maybe you can elaborate on that, and what if somebody tends to feel alone, and they feel that they can't even communicate with their family members. What do you suggest in areas like that?
Yes, yes, well, that is anxiety provoking because human beings are social creatures. It is unfortunate that the word social distancing was chosen instead of something like physical distancing, but social distancing it is.
Yeah.
So understanding that as social creatures, being connected in some way to other people is not an option. If a person is truly alone, isolated in every way, they are not going to be a happy person. It's interesting that even individuals who many would consider paragons of virtue, like for example, monks and nuns who spend their whole life praying, there's very few examples of hermits today. They have existed in past history, but a monastery, a convent, a group of spiritual people is by definition a community. They even call themselves a community of people. Because as human beings, we need that connectedness. Human beings may be full of anxiety, full of fear, simply for the reason that they are not connected and they do not feel connected. Now, as a spiritual leader, I know you believe, and I certainly believe, that everyone is always connected to the wider community, our community in heaven, and us on earth, we are connected. So even those who genuinely believe they are totally alone, don't have family, don't have friends, curled up on the sofa by yourself, you're connected to a wider community, to a spiritual community. We need some type of connectivity as human beings. It may be with physical people, with friends, with family, but it may also be with the wider community.
So as we move excuse me, along in this pandemic, what I'm seeing a little bit more of, where I wasn't originally seeing, is a lot of people are getting a little bit more short-tempered and dismayed and wonderment. As a spiritualist community, we talk about thoughts or things and how to keep that focus on what you want, not what you don't want. But even myself, I have to hold myself back from thinking about all the people that aren't doing well right now, that they don't have the money to pay their mortgage, they don't have money to get food and all of that. And for me, I have to kind of take my focus back to myself and say, just be aware of who I can help as I go along, to whatever I can help with.
Yes, exactly.
And sometimes that help doesn't have to be monetary. That help can be a call, some kind of, or a drive-by, hello, I just, going by your house, I'm out here, hi, something like that.
Yes, you mentioned irritation and substance abuse or substance use on the increase. So to take the second one first, substances we put in our body interfere with the physical, biological process of experience and emotion. Real substances interact in our physical bodies and in our brains. I think most people who have been to a 12-step group are familiar with the idea of numbing your emotions instead of experiencing or feeling your emotions. So yes, that's going to be on the increase now. The issue is that because we, modern people, in ordinary times, never learned how to handle our emotions, how to handle our fear in a fully constructive way, well, of course we can't do it now. That's the usual and ordinary times 100. So yes, it's very difficult.
Yes, it is. And the fact that, many people have been traumatized. This was a trauma.
It is.
9/11 was a trauma. There have been many traumas in our world, and just to share with folks that you know, just to share, you know, I just lost my mother, and I tend to be, you know, strong, you know, keeping strong about things. But and I connected with somebody in the family, and they said, "Oh, I'm doing fine. You know, everything's fine." So I'm thinking, God, how could they do fine, you know? And then I thought to myself, well, I was able to say to that person that I was experiencing pain, emotional pain, and in actuality, that was good for me.
Yes, sure.
Because I had lost my son, and I couldn't understand why I wasn't feeling it all.
Yeah.
So for those out there, we get numb
Sure.
to things.
Sure. And although these videos are centering on the emotion of fear, in reality, one of the things I've learned from people, from working with people over the years, is that we, human beings, we're not compartmentalized. We speak of ourselves as if we're compartmentalized, but there are all kinds of interactions inside of us. So, two emotions that you briefly mentioned intersect with fear. You said people are irritated. Okay, yes, one of my future videos is going to be on the emotions of anger and grief and how we handle those and how that impacts fear. Again, in ordinary times, we have very little information in our adult heads about how to handle anger in a constructive way. Probably the number one piece of self-talk that we all learned is don't be angry. Don't take that tone with me, young lady. Don't. But in terms of something constructive to do with anger, what do? So when we are afraid because we don't like, we human beings, not just us modern people, but we don't like the feeling inside of our body and our brain of being afraid. So we get mad about that. Certainly in terms of just staying home and wanting to go somewhere when the weather is beautiful, we get mad about that. There's all sorts of things that we get mad about that are connected with the fear. Since the pandemic is causing death, grief is also a huge emotion. Another emotion that many people simply do not know how to handle in a constructive way. So you've got the fear, you've got anger, and you've got grief. And those three emotions work together because we only have one body and one body and one brain. It's not like we have the fear part of ourselves is over here, and the anger part is here, and the grief part is here. We're one whole. So all of that might be going on inside of a person at one time. And I would want to say to our viewers, go easy on yourself. You don't know what you don't know. If no one ever taught you about these things, well then of course you don't know them. You have to learn how to handle your emotions, starting with how to recognize your emotions. You have to learn the instruction, the messages we got in the 20th century are as bad as this. They are at the level we have to start with just asking ourselves, how do I feel? Meaning, this that's going on inside of me, is that fear? This that's going on inside of me, is that anger? Is that grief? None of those three? Then what? Now, this is astounding because if you've ever worked with very young children, and I have, as soon as they learn the words and the meaning of the words, they can say them back to you. So you teach a young child, 2, 3, 4 years old, what anger is. Oh, you're throwing a temper tantrum, I see that you're angry. Then, as they learn this, they're going to be able to reflect that back to their adults. They're going to be able to say, Mommy, Daddy, I'm mad, I'm mad. Mommy, Daddy, I'm scared, I'm scared. I'm sad, I'm sad. But the generation of adults that's out there today never learned this. So we are starting at not just kindergarten level about our emotions. We actually have to start at preschool level
That is so true.
about our emotions.
And then for parents to realize that if you say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, or oh, there's no reason for that, to acknowledge to be acknowledged. Don't we all need to be acknowledged.
Yes,
And understood.
And specifically our emotions
Yes.
acknowledged.
And not stuffed. So
Yep.
there's so much. I mean, I feel like we could talk forever on every subject. And is there anything else that, well, for instance, one thing I've always wondered is what's the difference between a clinical psychologist and a social psychologist?
Oh, great question. I'm a clinical psychologist. We're trained both at the graduate level and through continuing workshops. And really for me, my biggest training has been working with people. Working with people has taught me about people. So a clinical psychologist is the person who does psychotherapy with people. Now, in today's day of pandemic, most states have authorized teletherapy where you can get a therapist or continue with your therapist by some type of video chat. And I think this is a wonderful thing, wonderful opportunity. Certainly for any viewers that if what we're talking about in these videos really stimulates strong emotions in you, then please reach out to a clinical psychologist to do some teletherapy at this time. But the instruction that clinical psychologists have gotten from social psychologists is very important. Social psychologists are a type of psychologist. Generally speaking, they do not do psychotherapy. They study the psychology of groups at all levels. And many of them work in academia, work in some university, and they do research projects in order to investigate and to learn just how does a human group work. A human group of any sort. It could be a family, it could be a small group, a group of friends, a work group. And if you want some fascinating reading, they have discovered some really interesting things about how groups work together. So anybody who in any way works with a group, which in today's world is going to be video chatting and Zooming and so on, would benefit greatly by learning a little bit of social psychology.
That's wonderful. We so appreciate. Again, we're looking forward to when is your book going to be able to be accessed by folks?
It's available now. It's published by Routledge. And again, it is primarily for high schools, for health teachers, school counselors, but also for superintendents of school, school principals, vice principals, and all teachers who are interested when we have our new normal, whatever that is.
Well, I'll be calling some.
Who are interested in helping young people grow up in a dramatically different way, a way in which everyone learns to honor their emotions and to express their emotions in a healthy way. That's what we call today emotional intelligence. Sometimes it's abbreviated EI, just like IQ is your intelligence quotient, EI. We want to help people from the time they're little children and on up through elementary school and high school to develop their emotional quotient, their emotional intelligence, so that, God forbid, if our children, those who are children today, if 20, 40, 50 years from now, they have to experience something similar to this, they'll at least know what to do with their emotions.
Right. And therefore it links to the fact that can a person at any time learn this?
Absolutely.
So I could be a 90-something.
Yeah, could be 90, doesn't matter.
Yeah, because we forget that each generation teaches the next generation.
Yes.
So as adults, we can actually help our parents by sharing with them what we've learned.
Sure. And
that changes them even. So
yes.
Nothing's ever gone, nothing's ever, it always matters. And
absolutely.
you can always make a difference. And you can teach old dogs, new tricks.
Yes. Well, or as we say, that may or may not be true of dogs, but it's definitely not true of human beings.
There we go.
Yes, we absolutely can learn this at any age. My number one caution to people about learning about emotions is to start small and keep it simple for yourself.
Simple.
Because like any body of human knowledge, any curriculum of human knowledge, there is much knowledge and there's much to know, much to understand, many aspects. You would not expect a kid to sit down before the TV and the first algebra class and then to walk out of there saying, okay, I got it now. I got algebra.
Mm-hmm.
No, you have a curriculum, which is a systematized body of instruction. We're going to teach you algebra. Okay, we know that means we have to teach you this first. And then this, and then this, and then we build on this. Learning human emotions is exactly the same way. You can't just say, okay, I think I got this stuff about emotions, and as if you're sort of embracing the whole thing. No body of knowledge works like that. There's a reason why medical school is 4 years, and then to learn a specialty, the residency is another 2, 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah.
It takes time to learn all of the information that you need to have expertise in the same field. And for adults to remember, go easy, you were never taught this. Of course, it's very strange to you, it's new, it's foreign. You may have a lot of questions about it, a lot of doubts about it. That's okay. Pick one thing. I chose breathing as the first thing to present to people because breathing is a biological process. I sometimes tell people, if a doctor came to you, said, okay, I see you're anxious, I'm going to give you something to help calm you down, and the doctor put a shot in my arm, me, an average person, would, okay, I've got something's in me now, I'm going to be okay now. Because we know, it makes a chemical change in the body, it makes a biological change in the body. Breathing is the same way. You breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide, in the lungs, the air goes into the blood, that makes real physical changes in the body. As real as the kind of physical changes that would happen if you were given a pill or given a shot. But my experience with people over the years is that because breathing is natural, we do it anyway, we do it all the time, people greatly discount the biological impact that deep breathing can have on anxiety. So if you need a first place to start, practice your breathing.
Yes, I so agree with that. It's amazing. And we're in a world where medicines are given out left and right. Prescription, half the world, the statistics are alarming.
Right.
So we don't have to get it's not a quick fix.
No.
In fact, when you stop it, you've got to go back and fix all the boo-boos that we hit up.
That's right. Whatever the strategy is that you're practicing, remember, you have to do it over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah, and it's repetition. And
That's
it's
how we
simple,
learn.
it's like you were saying, it's simple, but it may be hard to do.
Yes.
And the hard to do might be just our own thinking on how hard it's to do.
Absolutely. The principles in and of themselves are simple.
Yeah.
There's several reasons why they're hard. They're hard for us, one, because we didn't learn to do this when we were little kids. So it's new, it's strange, and some of what we've learned, and some of this has come out of social psychology, some of what we've learned about ourselves as human beings is counterintuitive. That is, we used to always think that the best way to handle emotions was to ignore them. Don't think about it, you'll be okay, you're fine. Many people grew up being taught this and learning this. Only there's no truth to that. What is, when an emotion is inside of you, it's inside of you. the fact that you're ignoring it, trying not to pay attention to it, doesn't make it go away.
Right.
In fact, I like one of the sayings that has come to us from the AA and other self-help groups. They have a saying. They say that the emotion comes out sideways. And yes, that's right. When people suppress, repress, deny, reject, tell themselves, no, 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 don't be emotional, don't be emotional, the emotion comes out sideways. So, and that does not mean positive things
Right. Exactly.
happening.
Exactly. And then you're not aware of how you're acting so different and so not.
And into inappropriate behavior.
Yeah. So the only way is through and in.
That's right. Can't get around it, can't get under it, can't get over it. The only way out is through.
Is through.
I absolutely believe that.
Well, we are so grateful if you to your knowledge and you doing this, of taking your time and offering this to us. And we're grateful as a church to be able to sponsor you to reach out to as many people. So we're hoping folks will continue to look at your videos and get the knowledge that's free and out there for us at this time.
Well,
So-
I appreciate that, and perhaps the viewer will subscribe and tell a
Yes.
friend to tell a friend, so
Yes.
that we can get the word around and
Yes.
more adults can develop their emotional intelligence, and our schools begin to take emotional intelligence seriously and own responsibility for teaching our young people about it, so that it's impossible to think that our young people, who of course we all hope and pray will outlive us by very many years, it's impossible to think that they're never going to have some big challenge that they go through.
Right.
They're going to have something, whether it's an earthquake or a tornado,
Yes.
they're going to have something that they
Yes.
go through. So let's prepare them
Prepare and protect.
emotionally to deal with even intense anxiety. One of my future videos is going to be about intense anxiety, and I will address it directly to doctors, nurses, those who are literally, as we say now, on the front lines,
Right.
but this will also be for everybody. We need tools in ordinary times about how to handle ordinary anxiety.
Right.
But in these times of pandemic, we need some information about how to handle intense anxiety. And we'll cover that in one of our future
Oh,
videos.
that's so wonderful, and I appreciate your time and your expertise, and we're grateful. Thank you, Dr. Krefft.
Thank you, Reverend Hoffman.